Hello and welcome. My name is Malcolm and I'm delighted to be making this video masterclass on electoral systems, one of a series we're making for the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. I'm here today in the chamber of the Australian Capital Territory Legislative Assembly in Canberra, a place where I worked as a parliamentary and ministerial advisor for many years. It's also an assembly which prides itself on its very representative way of electing its members, so it's a fitting venue for this topic. I'll be talking about the rules used in different electoral systems to translate the votes and preferences of each voter in an election into the MPs who sit in parliaments. If you're involved in assessing the strengths and weaknesses of different electoral systems or debating changes to your current system, you might like to know more about the options which are out there. If so, this masterclass is for you. Just to be clear, this masterclass is not about how elections are run in the sense of independent officials, campaigns and polling places, who nominates and when, and so on. Today we are focusing in particular on the specific rules about how votes are marked on ballot papers, how they are counted, and how those ballots turn the votes of the people into the seats of the members in Parliament. I'll discuss in a bit of detail, not too much, don't worry, how electoral system design can be used to ensure that electorate assemblies are representative of their communities and can operate as institutions capable of keeping executive governments responsible to those representatives. We'll start with a few words about the higher purpose of electoral systems, which is this: to select people to sit in representative assemblies in our democracies. Then I'll outline the major classes of electoral systems we currently see in use around the world, focusing on Commonwealth nations in particular. Then I'll go through the four main design questions that lie beneath all the world's electoral systems, drawing out their purposes and their features. Finally, I'll do a broad assessment of how the current electoral systems meet the tests of good design and what issues for reform they give rise to. The parliaments and assemblies we elect are absolutely crucial elements of our system of democratic government. Around the world, there are two broad approaches to forming governments: the system of responsible government through parliaments and the system of presidential government. The Commonwealth has examples of each of these two systems. Let's take the responsible government model first, because it's the most common of the two systems in Commonwealth nations. This system of government emerged as democracy began spreading across the world in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was actually first fully trialled in the province of Nova Scotia, Canada in the 1840s, and has gone on to provide the foundations of government across more than 50 Commonwealth nations and their many parliaments at state and federal levels. The key idea is that governments hold office when they have the support of the main chamber of the Parliament, which might be the only house or it might be the one termed the lower house. This system also requires that this House of Government is composed of elected members in such a way that it is representative of all the people. The principle that every vote is equal in the influence has a vital role in this idea of representation. Of course, many Commonwealth nations use the second system of government by electing executive presidents as their heads of state and government. But presidential systems don't present us with a major difference for parliamentary electoral system design, because it's still essential that the elected parliaments in those nations are also highly representative of the people. The same electoral system design principles apply, even where a president has a term of office independent of the popular House of Parliament. The two most common electoral system types are the first-past-the-post plurality system and the party list system of proportional representations. These and other electoral systems are the subject of our discussion today. While these two broad systems are the most common, there are other systems that are used in fewer places. We'll talk about these systems as well. Let's do a quick survey of what electoral systems are currently being used in the Commonwealth nations so we can orient ourselves. Roughly half of Commonwealth nations use the first-past-the-post system. As you can see on the map, this includes many large nations, including India, Nigeria, Pakistan, the United Kingdom, Canada, Nigeria, Malaysia and Tanzania. And it also includes most of the small nations in the Caribbean and several mid-sized nations in Africa. The next most used system is the party list proportional representation system. Nations which use this approach include several in Southern Africa, as well as Guyana and New Zealand. Then there are about 10 nations which use other electoral systems. Australia, which uses preferential voting, is the largest example. Now, we've made this masterclass with a particular reason in mind, which is to contribute to discussion among CPA members and their parliaments about electoral reform debates. In most cases, that debate will be about a first-past-the-post using nation considering change to another system, although there will be other situations where change is being discussed. In facing these debates, how should legislators, or people deciding on changes to national constitutions, decide which approach to use in voting systems? Well, most political scientists and most members of Parliament, for understandable reasons, focused on which systems yield the most seats for certain political parties, which systems favour large parties, which systems favour small new entrant parties, which systems favour incumbents, and so on. Today I want to step aside from partisan analysis and focus on the real customers of democracy, the voters. In this section of the masterclass, I'm going to try and set out a simple framework for how electoral system designers and legislators can fulfil for voters the promise of the system of responsible and representative government. It turns out that there are 4 pillars to this framework, or rather 4 design questions which need to be answered. 1. Do voters cast their votes directly for candidates to be their representatives, or do their votes go to political parties? 2. Do voters get to select just a single nominee for their political party and elect just one person as the representative of a group of voters? Or do they get to choose from and elect multiple representatives for their group or for their electoral division? 3. Do voters only get to mark a single vote for candidates, or can they indicate an order of preference which can be used as a backup if their first choice cannot win? And 4. Do the voting rules have the effect of ensuring that every vote is of equal weight? Or do they leave voters with different degrees of influence over election outcomes? Out of these 4 questions emerge more or less all the electoral systems of the world, although of course there are all sorts of specific details within each system. These pillars work together to support the ultimate goal that the greatest possible number of citizens of the community can elect a representative in the Assembly that they approve of and who feel represents them. It's this outcome, not the interest of any particular political party, which give the parliaments their legitimacy and help parliaments to bring fairness to society. Highly representative parliaments also prevent any part of society from feeling excluded from a fair say in the nation's political decisions, a situation which is sure to undermine the legitimacy of a democracy. So the first of these 4 design pillars is the question of who do we vote for? Do we vote for individual candidates or do we vote for political parties? It's a pretty fundamental choice. Obviously the systems of proportional representation are based on us voting for political parties. Most of the other electoral systems in the world are based on us voting for individual candidates. The second question is the one of how many candidates appear in each geographical electoral division. The first past the post system and others are based on just one candidate in a system. The proportional systems are based on many. The question is also fairly fundamental to the degree of choice that voters have. Obviously, we're very limited if only one candidate for each political party is available. Where more candidates are available, there's a great deal more choice. The third design question is the question of whether we are only able to vote for a single candidate or whether we can list a sequential ranking of candidates. If we do that, it allows various parties to run and not cause a spoiler effect if small parties eventually drop out and the votes cast for them are wasted. The fourth design question is probably the most important. It's the question of whether every vote is equal. There are many different ways of trying to make sure this happens, and down through history a number of steps were taken to try and ensure that everyone had an equal say. From the Great Reform Act of Britain in 1832, which got rid of heavily malapportioned electoral boundaries, to the invention of the single transferable vote system in the 1850s, which set a specific quota for every seat that was won in Parliament, onto the growth of party proportional systems from about the 1890s onward, and through to the 1960s, where issues of malapportionment and gerrymandering in America and other countries were heavily fought over to try and make sure that some voters were not more equal than others in the way that electoral systems actually worked. It's worth elaborating on 2 of these systems in particular. The quota preferential system, the single transferable vote, was fundamentally based, as we mentioned earlier, on individual candidates running for office, whereas the party PR system is fundamentally based on people giving their support to parties. It creates quite a significant difference, even though both are generally referred to as systems of proportional representation. The one maintains that direct link to individuals who run for election. The other involves political parties being the basis of the system. The latter can be criticised for taking too much power away from the accountability of representatives to the people and giving it to parties, but on the other hand, in some countries it's seen to be a force for creating discipline which helps good government come to pass. It's worth elaborating a little bit more on 2 of those systems in particular. The single transferable vote system is based on the quota, and it remains a system where direct election of individual candidates is the way the system operates.